Hello and welcome to Creeping Up the Candle, a new podcast in which we promised you honest and uplifting conversation between a first-year curate and her training incumbent. I'm the first-year curate, I'm a trainee priest in the northeast of England, and I have been training for 7 months here in Whitley Bay. We're going to look back on the last 7 months and explore what it means to be a curate in the Church of England in 2024. So, about business. Let's begin. John, the Lord be with you.
And also with you. Now, why are we starting with this greeting, Mary?
Well, we couldn't think of a non-cheesy way to begin a podcast about the Church of England. And as we have explored liturgy, and I've learnt new phrases and words, one of the things we do every Sunday is begin with the same formula of words, and after we've acknowledged God, that is the way that we begin all the services that we do together.
And I'm glad you remembered this time.
7 months in. Weirdly enough, being used to the liturgy, I could remember a lot of it at the beginning, but the one I always stumbled over was "The Lord be with you."
And also with you.
So, I'm Mairi Howell. As I said, I'm 7 months into being a trainee vicar, which we call a curate in the Church of England. And, in fact, I'm the Reverend Mairi Howell. I still forget to say that bit sometimes. And I'm here with my training incumbent.
I'm the Reverend John Villaseca, and I'm the Vicar of St. Paul's in Whitley Bay. I was ordained deacon in 2016, ordained priest 2017, and I've been in this parish for the last almost 5 years. And Mary, why are we doing this podcast instead of doing supervision?
Instead of doing supervision. Well, some people asked us to. I suppose at 7 months it's time to take stock, and it seemed like a good idea to sit down together and have a look back on how far we've come and maybe what we've learnt over these 7 months. And as we go on, we're hoping to do a few more episodes, and we'll explore things like Holy Week and the other things that we do in church. And also because we thought it might be a bit of fun, I think.
Absolutely. It's going to be a light-hearted approach, and for sure we are still doing supervision, just in case the powers to be are listening, that we are indeed keeping supervision.
Powers of be, so you are my training incumbent, but you're not my boss. Well, you're sort of my boss.
Well, that's right. Well, kind of. God is your boss, and then the bishop.
Yeah.
And then me, but I'm not your boss.
So what does the phrase training incumbent mean?
Training incumbent will be the priest with hopefully some experience that will help the curate, which is like in an apprenticeship really, the trainee priest that will begin his or her ministry in the church. So you have 3 years in which you learn not the job, because it's not a job, but you learn the ministry of serving God and God's people.
And while I'm here, obviously I'm Reverend Mairi Howell. Sometimes you're John, sometimes you're Father John, sometimes you're my training incumbent. You're never known by any other names.
That's right. No. Sometimes I'm Padre,
Yes.
Vicar, and so on. I've never been really fuss about what people call me. Whatever helps people, that's fine by me. And tell me, Mary, why are you not called Mother, Mary? Since you are now in a church a bit higher up the candle, why do you prefer, or would you prefer to be called Father?
Well, given the choice, probably Father. It's a thing which I suppose, as you say, it's up to the individual what they call you, but I really struggle with being called Mother. I know for some people it's helpful, and some high church priests take the tradition of being called Father if you're a man and use it as Mother. For me, I think, because I have 4 children of my own, who don't call me Mother either, Mum, probably. But it's a difference, I think, between being called Mother and Father, and if we're ordained to do the same job, I think I would choose Father over Mother. Also, I think I'd rather go by Reverend Mairi, or as we heard at the beginning, just Mairi, because to me it feels a bit of a barrier. But I know to people who've grown up in this tradition, they find it more of a help than a barrier. So I guess that leads us on to John's favourite phrase of my curacy so far. Well, that's what we do around here, but when you get your own church, you can please yourself.
Yes, Mary, and as you know, I'm always right, am I?
Bishop, God, yeah, no. So, but yeah, I guess it's partly about fitting in with the tradition in which you find yourself, isn't it? There's a balance to be struck between who you are and who you think of yourself, so Mairi or Reverend Mairi, and the tradition into which we've come. We didn't, until I arrived, I think, have a full-time female priest, did we? So
No.
there's no expectation, as far as I can tell among the congregation, that I would be Mother Mairi. And I know there are good theological reasons why some people choose to, but it doesn't work for me particularly, so I'd rather not go with it.
Freedom of God's children, and that's what it is, really important. Now, Mairi, it's been 7 months that you've been here with us at St. Paul's, and we just briefly discussed the nature of trainee incumbent and curate, or curacy. This is not a normal job or 9 to 5 kind of job. It's not a job you apply for as you would do to become a GP, a teacher, or whatever. So how did you find the process of discernment, and indeed, how did you find the process of applying for a curacy, and how did you end up here?
I should probably explain to our listener that when you start training, start the process of looking into becoming a curate, you work with someone called the Diocesan Director of Ordinands, who works with you from before you are recommended for training all the way through college. And the idea is that by then they know you very well. They then look at all the parishes which might have a curate coming up, and they decide which curacy they think you would be suited to. And you're allowed a bit of say in that. I think in the olden days, it was very much
sent to. Yeah.
But because, as I said, I've got 4 kids, they had a say in. They wanted to stay near schools. One of them wanted to be near an ice rink. And obviously the style of church is important. So I spoke to the DDO about where I was, what sort of church I would be comfortable in, and she had a look at the list of churches needed and decided that St. Paul's might suit. How did it look from your point of view?
I was invited to ask for a curate, so I wrote a letter and asking for a curate, and I put together a parish profile describing the kind of church, the congregation, the services, the missional work we do, and the kind of ministry we are dealing, and that's of course the profile that was given to you by the DDO.
Yes.
When St. Paul's was suggested. It was a straightforward process for me, and of course, after completing my own curacy, I was more or less expecting that process.
So then that was sent on to me, and when I looked at it and thought it sounded a bit like me, the DDO arranged what I can only describe as a bit of a blind date.
Absolutely.
I arrived, I think, on the hottest day of the year.
You did. It was July 2022.
Yeah.
Must have been. It was very hot. You looked very quiet. Clearly not yourself.
I was being polite.
Very well behaved. Absolutely.
It's one of the things that a lot of people say is we basically arrive, there's no script. And people ask, so I'm going to meet a potential TI, what sort of things should I ask them? Some of it's common sense, but I think a lot of it is basically, are we going to get on? Are we going to be able to work together?
My experience when I was in my college, at the end of the last term in college before ordination, you had a training incumbents day. So all our training incumbents would descend to the college for a day. And I remember sitting in this big room with all my colleagues from college, sitting next to their training incumbents.
Had it been decided by then?
Yes.
This wasn't part of the decision, right?
All the curacies were arranged by that point, and it looked like all arranged marriages. And by then you could discern which marriages will not last 6 months. And indeed, that was the case, sadly, in some cases.
I think someone said 1 in 4 curacies break down, and I don't know where I got that figure from, but it's certainly quite a high number because it's a really odd job. I think especially, we said it was like a medieval apprenticeship, and it really is, because especially before I knew what I was doing, we spent a lot of time together, didn't we? I followed you round.
I think it is important that the working relationship is right.
Yes.
And that in that case, I'm not projecting myself and anxieties or shortcomings onto you, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Expectations are to be very clear for a good working relationship. I think that is very important.
Yeah, and I think that's what I felt the first day when I came here. When I'd spoken to the bishop, I think it was Bishop who said, so Mairi, you're looking for someone who calls a spade a spade. And I think that was the impression I got of you, that you were going to be a good communicator. And so people say, is it important that you're the same tradition, the same views on various theological things? And I think most things you could work through, couldn't you?
No, we don't agree with everything.
No.
That's expected. How boring would that be if we would agree with everything?
And I think we've both learnt a lot from being different from each other as well, haven't we?
Absolutely.
So
enriching, isn't it?
Yeah.
It just brings more richness. And remember the first time you came along, that the hottest day of the year, July, and I remember the first time you visited the church with your two daughters. You came to the service. Some people asked you several questions, but of course at that point you couldn't.
Confidential.
You couldn't say anything, and then that was the day you all behaved.
The day we all behaved. It's a famous day in our family to this very day. There was a bit of a mix-up. I thought that you had wanted all of the family to come.
I was hoping that all your family would come for lunch, as I invited you and all your children and husband to come along for lunch after the service in the vicarage with the church wardens and other church officers. And I sent you an email, if you remember, asking, confirming how many people were coming for lunch.
Ah, yes, the clear communication beginning from the beginning.
Not sure, I will let you know. Nothing else was heard until you appeared in church with two children, which my assumption was that 3 people were coming for lunch, to discover just before lunch was served that actually the whole family was coming for lunch. So I had to provide a full lunch for, I think, 10 people.
It was
without realising.
It was like a brilliant sitcom moment, wasn't it? You were in the kitchen going, oh my goodness, I've got all these people for lunch. We need to make a good impression.
And the future church warden going mad thinking, will you have enough china?
And then I was out here in the living room going, everybody needs to behave because we haven't confirmed the curacy yet. And I'm sure the curacy would not have depended on my children's behaviour, but it still felt a bit like that.
It was a lovely lunch
we
will
good.
Remember for as long as we live.
So many reasons. But I suppose that points to the fact that for people who asked me, how do you decide? It really isn't about any one thing that anyone says, or there isn't a correct set of questions to ask. It's just about, what happens when you turn up and cram all your children round with one small trifle.
That's right. And everyone was fed.
Everyone was fed.
Like the miracle.
It was fine.
Of the feeding of the 5,000.
I just remember John looking scared and going, I don't need to have trifle if you don't want me to. And I'm like, I think I could work with this person. And in fact, it was a really useful exercise. So it obviously wasn't a job interview, and nothing we said specifically would have mattered. But it helped that the children came and saw where we'd be living, met some of the people I was going to be working with. So in terms of demystifying the next step.
And again, it's about expectations, isn't it? And being clear about the expectations and what you will find once you are ordained deacon.
Yes, exactly. So, so that is how I come to be here. I think it was a question a while ago, wasn't it? It's also interesting when we announced it, having seen each other on our best behaviour, various people had views about, you're going to John. And I think you got the same, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Your reputation preceded you in a great way.
I know. You see, I got a lot of, Johnny is so quiet. How will you get on with him? Questions.
I got something like, you would not know when it hit you.
I know. But I guess that's another thing, isn't it? Not to listen to other people's experiences of your TI, but to suss it out for yourself. And John is more than capable of coping with what has hit him, I think.
Just about.
Just about. Most days. So then it was an odd time because that happened in August and I didn't get ordained until July the following year. So I knew where I was coming to, but I still had a whole year of college to complete. And then I arrived.
Mm-hmm. You were ordained July, was it? 2023.
Yeah.
Newcastle Cathedral. And tell us, Mairi, on the moving into the parish, of course, you move into a new home, a new ministry, a new job, as it were, and a new parish. So how was the transition?
With hindsight, it was completely overwhelming, I think, because part of our thing was we had kids doing GCSEs. Yes, GCSEs. So we didn't want to move until after they'd finished. And so I ended up moving and beginning curacy the same week. Well, moving, getting ordained, beginning curacy. So looking back now, I think my head was so full of working out new things here, going home, building IKEA furniture. There was just a lot. So if anyone's looking for advice, I would advise you to move before curacy.
Absolutely, but you managed remarkably well with all these demands and things on your plate, and as well the settling in the parish. So how was that process? Looking at your ministry with us,
I think it was lovely. I think, and not just because they're hopefully listening, but the congregation here is very welcoming and very friendly. They were very keen to ask how you're settling in.
How many times? How many times when you ask this question?
Still people ask me this. But it's a reflection of everyone is very keen to know that I was settled in. And of course I didn't have the relationships with them now that I do, so they couldn't say, did you have a good holiday? Or, that's literally all they knew about me was that I was the new curate, so how was I settling in?
And remember that they have to learn one new name. You have to learn lots of other new names. So
many. And the fact that I think I'd done my church life for 20 years in my previous church with a bit of a break, but mainly 20 years. So I was sort of looking at St. Paul's and going, we used to do it like this. We used to start services at 9:45, now we begin at 10. I used to know a person a bit like you in my old congregation, they were called this. You've got a different name. So I think I spent a lot of my first couple of weeks translating from this is what I know of church life, this is how I understand it, to working out what you did here, which was slightly different, but close enough that it wasn't an entirely new learning experience. It was a weird one.
Interesting for you to be reflecting on those things, isn't it? And,
yeah. I remember one time doing a Facebook post in which I put all of the service times for our old church.
Yes, it created a bit of commotion.
Which was weird, because obviously in my mind 9:45 is the time the morning service starts. And I think that's certainly not true anymore, and I've certainly got a lot more headspace, and St. Paul's feels natural and normal now. But yeah, definitely, again, if anyone is listening for advice, just hold on for the first couple of months. It's weird and overwhelming because it is so much change. I mean, we were lucky in many ways that we didn't need to move the children's school, so I know a lot of people have that to contend with too. But all we had to do was find a way to get them onto the metro and back to their old school. So,
what about wearing the dog collar?
Dog collar.
Because of course you are beginning your new ministry as deacon and curate here, but at the same time you are now an ordained minister of the Church of England. So you are visibly an ordained minister with a dog collar. What was the transition onto that?
I hadn't expected to become public property, I think, in the way that you do. It's wonderful. You get some brilliant conversations when people just walk up to you in the street. I had one this morning. I know this is a strange question, but... and now I've no idea what strange questions are going to be coming my way, but they don't faze me particularly. To begin with, I was surprised you'd go into shops, and some people don't know what the dog collar is about. So I was in a furniture shop and someone assumed I worked there and asked me if I had any bread bins. So, of all the years of training, it's not where the bread bins are. My eldest son does go to a Catholic school, and obviously they don't have female ministers there. So one of his friends, when I turned up to his school play, I probably wouldn't do it now in a dog collar, but I was dashing, just looked at me and asked their mum why is that child's mum come in her nun costume? So really interesting that people, really positive in many ways, that people still want to come up and talk to you. And yeah, the expectations again that you might be a bit judgy, which I hope I'm not. So someone came up to me in Sainsbury's and said, I've been really good. That's brilliant. I'm delighted you've been really good, but that's not how I see my ministry at all. I don't think God expects us to, It's not a case of being good, is it? Life is difficult and messy, and God is there with us. So that was funny. The ultimate worst one was I walked into a shop and someone looked at the dog collar and went, "Are you a real one or a kissogram?"
Oh. I mean, this is a very interesting point, because in my experience, and I wonder whether that's something to do with gender, that I haven't had this kind of reaction. Certainly, I've never been called a kissogram, but and that is something that's worth reflecting.
Yeah.
Perhaps our listeners would like to send their comments if they are ordained ministers, and depending on whether you are male or female, what is the reception with the general public. Yeah,
it's really interesting, and I think the local shops and things, it's wonderful because they identify me straight away as the new minister from St Paul's, and I think some people choose not to wear it. I think absolutely I would, because the opportunities, it gives people permission to walk up and just ask you stuff, and I love that. Except the kissogram thing.
Indeed, yes, that's not very pleasant. But it is important to be recognisable in your community, and that to be incarnated, to be to be present in the community, to be the visible face of the church.
I think that's another thing which I found really interesting when I first moved here, the idea that you are off duty sometimes, but obviously I was a teacher before. You went into school, you taught, you came out again, and quite often if you bumped into kids in the street, it would be an absolute revelation. Whereas here, our working times are different, and sometimes you can be on, not obviously doing a service or running a group or whatever, and still just going shopping. You are, as you say, incarnating, being part of the role.
And this is our call.
Mm-hmm. Although, having said that, certainly some of my own kids, when I first got ordained, said things like I wasn't to be wearing a cope in public. Cope, of course, being something we'd wear in church, which sets us up nicely for our next podcast. What are we going to be talking about next time, John?
Next episode, we'll be talking about vestments and other clerical clothes, and why do we wear the dog collar, why black, why blue, why grey, and some eccentric liturgical shoes that some like to wear for every season. So I hope you will be able to join us for our next episode. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thanks, John.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creeping Up the Candle. We hope you enjoyed it. If so, please follow us, and we'll be back with another episode very soon. And last but by no means least, thank you so much to Kevin and Estelle Holland for providing the music.